Welcome to City Connection. It's Monday, January 5, 2026, and I'm your host, Allison Donahue. Brought to you by the Grand Rapids Community Media Center, this live program connects you directly with our city officials, giving you the chance to hear the latest local news and ask questions about the issues that matter most to you. Joining us later on the show today is Mayor David LeGrand. But first, let's go over some of the latest updates from around Grand Rapids. Grand Rapids is once again transforming winter into something to look forward to. The World of Winter Festival kicks off Friday, January 9, and runs through March 1, 2026, turning downtown into a winter wonderland. This is America's largest free winter festival, featuring more than 60 large-scale art installations, interactive light sculptures, live performances, and family-friendly events spread throughout parks, plazas, and bridges downtown. Most experiences are free. Just bundle up, head out after dark, and explore. The Grand Rapids Fire Department has teamed up with Corewell Health to launch a 6-month pilot program aimed at improving emergency care coordination. A full-time community health worker will ride with fire crews to help divert non-medical 911 calls to more appropriate resources like housing, mental health support, or food assistance. The goal is to reduce unnecessary emergency department visits and better connect residents to services before crises escalate. Officials call it a first-of-its-kind effort in West Michigan. Grand Rapids announced 2025 was a historic year of construction investment, approaching $1 billion in total project value for 2025, surpassing 2024's record of roughly $728 million. Major developments like the Amway Stadium and Acrisure Amphitheater are among the high-impact projects fueling that growth. City leaders say the unprecedented building activities signal strong economic momentum for the community. Last month, the city opened the new Public Service Center, a roughly $98 million facility that consolidates key municipal operations. The center brings departments like Public Works, Parks and Recreation, and Fleet Services under one roof, and includes sustainability features and improved public access. City leaders say the move will boost service delivery and support future redevelopment of the riverfront. With the holidays behind us, the city of Grand Rapids is reminding residents about easy ways to recycle live-cut Christmas trees now through the end of the month. You can drop off your tree for free at designated parks through the end of January, or choose a fee-based curbside pickup on your regular collection day with the proper yard waste tag. Trees collected will be recycled through chipping and composting, helping keep yard waste out of landfills. Designated parks for tree drop-off include Riverside Park, McKay J.C.'s Park, and Huff Park. And the city of Grand Rapids has named 3 new department directors following recent leadership searches. Laura Claypool will lead Parks and Recreation, Selma Tucker is the new Community Development Director, and Wayne Jernberg takes the helm of Utilities. That's it for city updates. When we come back from the break, we'll be joined by Mayor David LeGrand. Welcome back to City Connection. I'm your host, Allison Donahue, joined by Mayor David LeGrand. This month, we're focusing the conversation on housing here in Grand Rapids. Mayor, thank you for coming back. Happy New Year.
Likewise.
Any resolutions for the new year?
I don't do that.
That's fair. I never follow through with them, so I might as well not either.
I either have none or 400, depending on how you want to count. Yeah.
So we're talking about housing again this month, and in the fall, the city released the 5-year housing plan for 2026 through 2021 or 2031, and it guides how federal housing dollars are going to be spent here in Grand Rapids. In plain terms, could you describe why Grand Rapids residents should care about this document?
Sure. They should care a little bit. Federal housing dollars, HUD dollars, go to some affordable housing projects, and we do have great work. And actually, you've had me and the head of the Housing Commission on before. So it's good that these programs are good. They're important. The money tends to be stewarded into really long-term projects, and so there's nothing dramatic going on, but good stuff. Like, for example, some people in town probably know the Adams Park Apartments over on, is it on Fuller? I think it's on Fuller. It's kind of where Fuller runs out of energy, but that building is slated to be demolished, and the residents there are excited to have something other than what they're currently living in. So there's going to be a new, better vision coming there post demolition. So that's fun. It's exciting.
Yeah.
It's one of the things that money goes towards. But that's one of the pieces of a really big puzzle of the housing problem. So I guess the other reason maybe people should care about it is they should really look enough to realize that's maybe 5% of the energy that we need in the housing space. It's not the primary driver, I think, of big initiatives. It's more a long-term, medium-scale support.
Of the public dollars that go toward housing in Grand Rapids, how much of that is from the federal government?
Well, it depends on what you mean. Most of it, if you were to count, say, what we used, I don't know if they still call Section 8. So there are about, I think, 10,000 Section 8 vouchers in town. There are a lot, and that's a direct payment, kind of like the SNAP program. It's a direct payment to landlords to cover a substantial portion of the rent of people below an income threshold, and so that's a very big program. The players in the space tend to be, there's some state money too that goes into projects. There are more substantial state tax breaks that get applied project by project. And those but then there are some federal ones too. So people in the business use acronyms. So one of the acronyms is LIHTC, and LIHTC is a sort of a lottery-based, points-based, like you put in an application, sort of like applying for a grant. You say, hey, we want to build project X in this place. We want to do it for affordable low-income units. And so places like Genesis and ICCF and Habitat will apply for these grants, I think usually after they've assembled a substantial parcel, and then hope that they can get what's called LIHTC funding. And that's why sometimes in town you look at places and you think, why has that piece of land been empty for 10 years? I know that agency X owns it. Why haven't they done anything? And the answer is they're waiting to see if they get LIHTC approval. So ICCF did a great project right across from my church on Eastern. Well, they had to get LIHTC approval. It took a while. There was some, they were very happy when they got it, but it wasn't a guarantee. And then right down the street, another one went in recently, and I know for a while that was waiting for to see if it would get LIHTC. So sometimes when you look around, you're frustrated by the speed of things going on. It's because the more you get the government involved in things, the more regulatory hoops you get, the more programs you get, the more people have this sort of wait and see, and maybe I'll do it, but only if I get X break. And the reality is that, as I'm sure everybody watching knows, the reality of construction, and of course the cost of construction really drives the cost of housing. And the cost of construction has gone up faster than inflation for decades now. And so, and the cost of housing has gone up faster than inflation for decades now across the country. So we all sort of woke up and really started worrying about it in the last 3 to 5 years, it feels like everywhere in North America. But those macro trends have been real and there for a long time. I mean, 10 or 15 years ago, everybody kind of noticed that about healthcare, that the cost of healthcare always goes up faster than inflation. And for years, that was true of higher education too. That, if you were going to U of M, if inflation was 2%, your tuition bill would go up 4%, and it would go up 4% the next year, and the next year, and the next year. So my impression is that in higher ed, they've generally got those costs under control now, and generally speaking, higher ed seems to go up about the rate of inflation. Healthcare is a dilemma because we would all be happier to have better treatments. We're all happy to pay for research. We would all like the thing that bothers us to have a cure for it. So we're all sort of incentivized to want more and more and more healthcare. With housing, it doesn't have to be this way. And there are things nationally that people are starting to talk about to fix the housing shortage. I mean, we're not, the Duchy of Schleswig or something. Like, we are a huge country. We're not running out of land, and we're not running out of 2x4s, and we're not running out of people who are capable of building buildings. So unless those things were true, housing shouldn't be going up super inflationary, but it is.
One interesting type of housing that I've heard talked about recently is 3D printed housing. Have you been following that conversation at all?
Yeah, I mean, it's an idea, right? I mean, building houses out of Lego is an idea. Really what it comes down to is, the question is, do you save any money? Do you save costs? And the thing about 3D printing is, as I understand it right now, you can use machines that look like 3D printers to basically pour a concrete building. Well, that's great, but most of the cost involved is not people in the cement trucks. Most of the cost is in the materials, and in having things done on site. And so I have not heard anybody argue that 3D technology is going to make housing cheaper.
Okay.
I've had people say, ooh, this is cool, just like they say, cars that go 0 to 60 in 2 seconds are cool. They're also cool. I mean, 3D printing is cool. I have a friend who has a 3D printer, and he prints off parts for his boat. He loves it. It's cool. It's weird what you could do with 3D printers. But
you don't think it's the future of housing?
I don't think it's the future of housing. Now, if I'm wrong, I mean, the simple answer is, for me, it's all an economic question. How can we build as affordably as possible? And if somebody came along and said, you can save 20% by using a 3D printer, I'd say, hallelujah, let's do it. But I don't hear anybody saying that.
What's leading that conversation in your mind right now? Like the most affordable way to address here in Grand Rapids, just keep it local to where we are.
Sure. I think there are really 3 things. 1, regulations that don't make any sense, that don't add any value, that increase the cost. 2, people fighting back against density on their block. Everybody's happy to have density somewhere off their block, but it's very easy for people often get worked up about, like, my gosh, what if more people move onto my block? And so even if you moved onto your block 3 years ago, you feel like, well, I'm me, I get to move onto my block. But if somebody else wants to move onto the block, there's this human impulse to like close the door after you get through the door. And that's just a dynamic that's true for us in a lot of contexts, right? If there's a birthday cake and there are 6 slices and you're the 6th person that shows up, you don't want to reslice the birthday cake, right? You think, hey, I was the 6th person, too bad, number 7. So that's the second thing. And really the third thing is whether we can actually get more efficiency in how we build. And there are lots of interesting conversations there, and there are ways to do that. And now there are probably 20 good ideas, but I think in broad terms, you're talking about deregulation, you're talking about local facilitation, and you're talking about driving down the cost of construction. Now, the 4th option is whether you want to take public money or taxes and use it to make housing cheaper for your neighbor. And that's certainly something we can do, right? I mean, we do that for food, we do it for healthcare, we do it for lots of things. So housing is axiomatically can be a safety net issue, and so should we be making sure that everybody in our community lives in safe, stable housing? That should absolutely be the goal. And if we have to spend some tax dollars to do that, we can. But that doesn't really affect the can you build it cheaper? It's not going to drive down affordability. It's just going to pay for the very expensive product. So there are 2 conversations there, but in terms of how do we make things cheaper, there are three big baskets in that area.
I have a few thoughts on these. So for the second one, about folks being concerned about density being added to their neighborhood, I've seen that conversation happen a few times now around Grand Rapids, where multi-family units are being proposed in single-family neighborhoods. How much of a roadblock does that end up being for developers, and does it limit what is actually coming to? Has it been successful from like the neighbors' standpoint that are fighting back against this?
Well, I mean, you're imposing a cost on construction. So anytime you say, no, I don't want 20 townhouses in my neighborhood because everyone's on a 5-acre parcel and we like it that way. Well, to the extent that gets talked about for 2 years, if the developer's already got costs involved, if they already bought the land, let's say, you're making the whole project more expensive. And then if you say, oh, gee, housing's unaffordable, well, time is money. And so anything that delays, that slows down the construction process is a cost you're putting on the project, right? The other, and the other thing is just like, nobody wants to get yelled at for a living. It's not much fun. So if
You're a politician and you're saying
it's
that.
not
I can't
fun.
believe that.
It's not. I mean, that is not the part of the job that's rewarding, right? And so, you know, if you really make people feel unwelcome, yeah, they will not feel welcome and they will act accordingly, right? So, I mean, it's one of the tragedies of our country right now is acting like people who weren't born in the United States aren't welcome here. It's appalling. And we're doing it, and it's gonna have real consequences. It's gonna have generational consequences. I mean, right now, you know, the incredibly bright 12-year-old kid who loves chemistry and lives in Delhi is probably not dreaming about getting a PhD at Stanford, given the national signals we're sending out. I mean, the tragedy is, like, we have the best education system in the world. We could be attracting people to come join us in the American dream, and we're slamming the door shut on that. Well, housing's the same way. Like, if you like living in Grand Rapids, but you don't want to let other people live here, you can take that position. I completely disagree with you. I profoundly disagree with you. If you want to say that the only people you care about in Grand Rapids are people who own their houses, or who have big houses, or who have big lawns, again, I profoundly disagree with you. You can say it. I just don't agree with you.
What do you think is the balance then for neighbors and developers on, I mean, I've sat in on some of the conversations where they're discussing the facade of the building and making sure it matches other houses. But do you think a developer does have, you know, it should meet the demands of the community in some way?
Sure. I mean, I think it's important to get community input. And also, look, I'm a collaborative person. I think usually when you have a respectful, thoughtful conversation with people, new interesting ideas will come out of it that you hadn't thought of before. I mean, it happens to me on a daily basis. I'll be in the middle of a conversation with somebody and think, oh, maybe we could do this. Or someone will be like, well, you shouldn't do that, and here's why. So if those aren't conversations where what you're doing is you're trying to prevent the thing, where you're trying to, and you could prevent it by talking it to death, you could prevent it by making impossible demands, like, oh, it has to fit the neighborhood, so the outside has to be made of gold. Well, you could say that that's to fit the neighborhood, but really what you don't want to do is you don't want the thing there, you want it to be expensive, right? On the other hand, and those things can get chokeholds too. So for example, Heritage Hill, which is where I live, I think it's appropriate to say, look, David LeGrand's house is 110 years old. It's nice that it looks historic. It's nice to do some of these things to it. But if you say the empty lot next to David LeGrand's house, you have to build something that looks like it was built in 1900, you lost me. I think that empty lots in Heritage Hill, if you want to build some, you know, some mid-century looking thing in it, or some nice new architectural statement, knock yourself out. And it's an empty lot. I don't think you're damaging Heritage Hill. So I think those kinds of, when you get into like veto, like I don't think I have the right to tell you what color of sweater to wear to work. And at some point, you know, if you own the land, like how much do we want to constrain people's choices, right? Neighborhood,
and I don't know that there are any others, but neighborhoods like Heritage Hill, they do kind of have some restrictions. Would that be for new builds as well on what the facade looks like?
Absolutely. And those can become essentially veto over new development. And so this actually kind of famously happened in the island of Manhattan. They started with a historic commission and they were like, let's preserve old historic buildings, which sounds great. But then eventually what happened was most of the island of Manhattan, tons of buildings on Manhattan got designated historic, which functionally stopped people building new buildings. And then you wind up with housing pressures. So like if you have housing pressure, you have to be able to build new houses. And like Grand Rapids just demonstrably has empty lots that things could be built on in every neighborhood I'm familiar with. Every single neighborhood has empty open lots. And of course, neighborhoods like mine, which are old, like there are 4 units in the neighborhood. There are multi-units, there are things that were built as 4 units, there are things that were converted to multifamily rentals. And so there was flexibility in the past. And so the idea that we have to like stop change doesn't work. I mean, life changes every day. And so the real question is how do we go forward in some way that fits our values? And if our values are just like, I want things to stay the way they are, Well, that's like saying I wish I could hold my breath underwater for 25 minutes. I mean, I can want it, but it's not going to happen. If what I say is, we value X, then we can have a conversation around the value.
Right. Looking back at that 5-year housing plan mentioned earlier, it shows that 45% of renter households are cost burdened and nearly 25% are severely cost burdened, meaning that they spend over half their income on housing. What does that tell you about life for renters in Grand Rapids?
Yeah, well, I mean, one thing I think it tells you is that, so first of all, it tells me that we've got to do work there. And so I don't want that to get lost in the discussion. So let me say one negative thing and one positive thing, maybe. The negative thing to say is that it has bothered me for a long time that we subsidize home ownership in America and we penalize renting. And specifically in Michigan, there's something called the homestead property tax exemption. And what that does is it basically gives homeowners about half the property tax level that rentals have. And it's not like the landlord, selflessly takes on property tax, they pass it on to the renters. Mm-hmm. And so if you double tax rental units, you're double taxing people who are less likely to be affluent than the people who own houses. So you're basically got a regressive property tax mechanism. That's bothered me for a long time. I think it's not really defensible. Unfortunately, in America, one of the things, we tend to give things to the middle class because they vote very well. Mm-hmm. And so you can often do things that are really bad for the less affluent because there's no political price for doing it. You can get away with it. Just like we tend to give far too much stuff in our country to people of retirement age and above because they're a really reliable voting bloc. And so we keep doing intergenerational wealth transfers from folks your age to 75-year-olds. It's a bad idea, but we keep doing it because the political incentives are in place to do it. Mm-hmm. There are lots of ways that we drive up the cost of rental units in Michigan and in Grand Rapids that I think aren't great. That's one of them. The other is, although it's well-intentioned to do rental inspections, I think that rental inspections which are looking for safety issues and health issues are really a good idea. Mm-hmm. But rental unit inspections which don't get at those issues are costs that get passed along to renters. So no one's coming to my house every year to see whether I have too many extension cords in my living room. Mm-hmm. We actually do in Grand Rapids have people who we pay to go out and check who go look at extension cords in rental units' living rooms, and then they bill the landlord. Well, then the landlord passes along to the tenant. So we kind of have this we can fall in the trap of treating renters, infantilizing them, treating them like they're not grown-ups and like they can't take care of their own extension cords or clean their own bathrooms or figure out what they want to have in their back porch. So we've built an architecture that kind of it acts like renters aren't full adults sometimes, and then we charge people for it. The positive thing that I will say about that rental statistic is that another way of looking at that number would be to say, okay, so there are people who have fairly low income who are living in our urban core. That's actually good because those folks don't have to spend nearly as much money on transportation. So I think when people, the usual metric that people have been using for about the last decade on housing is they say, what percentage of your income are you spending on housing? I think that's a bad metric. I think a much better metric would be, what percentage of your income are you spending on housing and transportation? So if you can live, you work here. Mm-hmm. If you could rent an apartment that let you come here and not have to have a car, you save $10,000 a year. Mm-hmm. That's $800 a month you can spend on an apartment on Leonard Street. Whereas if you live out in Ada and you got to drive to work, that apartment is implicitly $800 a month more expensive than the apartment here. But if we're only looking at the sticker price of the apartment, you don't capture that value of not having to spend a whole lot of money on cars. Right. So one of the nice things about cities is you don't have to be as car dependent. I mean, I bike here usually when we have these conversations. It's a little far for me to walk, but I walked to City Hall this morning. I can walk to lots of things in my life. If I lived in Ada, that would be a much tougher job.
Is that considered when thinking about like the affordability of housing, how accessible it is to public transit?
Well, it's usually not in that stat, and that's my point. Like, I think that instead of saying what percentage of your income do you spend on housing, we should be asking what percentage of your income do you spend on housing and transportation? Because then we're talking about you broadly, like when you go work at your job, how much money is left over after the getting around component of your life and the housing component. And the reason I say that is because we spend shocking amounts of money on the getting around component if we just assume that every single worker in our community has to have a car. Now, I'm not saying it's easy to get to a greater than 1-to-1 job to car ratio, but if you could build a world in which we had 1.5 jobs per car in a household, you just generated a lot of extra wealth. And so the housing, there's lots we can do for affordable housing, but we also have to work on affordable transportation, because that bundle is what people consume, and it's all gone every month. If you're a renter and you pay your rent, the money's gone. If you are consuming it in a car, the money's gone, right? If you go buy yourself a wonderful book, you've got it a month from now. So these are just consumable items, right? Transportation and housing are things we sort of consume on a daily basis, just like food.
Right. Well, I believe that is all the time that we have for this segment. We will be back after another break, and when we return, we'll be answering questions from viewers. Send in a question to cityconnection@grcmc.org or submit a question through the Rapidian's Instagram story @TheRapidian.
Those shoes anymore in public, which I probably shouldn't.
Welcome back to City Connection. It's January 5, 2026, and we're joined here by Mayor David LeGrand. During this part of the show, we'll be taking questions from viewers, starting with a documenter. This documenter asks, is there a required percentage of affordable housing in new developments that needs to be met?
So, the word affordable covers a lot of ground, right? One man's affordable or one woman's affordable is not affordable for somebody else. So let's just acknowledge that, right? For some people, if you're living on SSI disability, it's hard to imagine anything be affordable. But the answer to the question is, it depends. So the LIHTC thing has specific requirements if you're using a federal program. If you're taking advantage of pilot programs, there are affordability requirements. So most of the things that come in front of City Commission will say, and we want brownfield, and 6 of our 18 units will be, the term we use is AMI all the time, and that means area median income. Area median income for a family of 4 is $65,000 about right now. The $65,000 number kind of sticks in my head. So let's say you wanted to have a housing unit that was for a family making 30% AMI. What you're saying is a family making $20,000 a year, which means a $10 an hour job, roughly. So if a family of 4 and one person's working and making $10 an hour, they'd be making 30% AMI. Maybe they'd be making $9 an hour. I think it's actually a little less than 10. And if you're 80% of AMI, well, 6 times 8 is 48. So then you're talking about somebody who's making $22, $23 an hour. So it's complex, but yes, that metric is used all the time, and the percentage of things that qualify for various programs varies. But almost every housing project I've seen come in front of Commission, well, I guess they wouldn't be coming in front of us. I don't know if anybody's out there just saying, I will build this and I don't need any tax breaks. But there are a lot of programs that the city uses to try to incentivize all kinds of things. We do it for commercial stuff too. There's something called an obsolete property tax. It's called OPRA, which means basically if you invest in this property, we promise we won't raise your property taxes for a while. There's an industrial facilities one. If you invest in this, we promise we won't raise your taxes for a while. There are all kinds of tax breaks, and they're used to incentivize people to do development and build things, we hope.
So that is So folks are only bringing development projects in front of the commission if they're asking for tax breaks, essentially, is that?
No, I'm saying we wouldn't see them if they didn't want a tax break,
Yeah,
right?
okay, yeah.
So we're seeing them to approve like the brownfield or we have something called pilot, which is payment in lieu of taxes,
Okay.
which is a good thing that lowers property taxes on rental properties. There are just tons of programs, so.
This question was emailed in to us. Does HUD define what affordable housing is in terms of where its money can go, or does the city? Either way, how is it defined?
Okay, I don't think, if you could roll that question back on your teleprompter, I'm not sure that, okay, in terms of where its money can go, in
I'm
other words,
guessing it's
does a
HUD.
project qualify for HUD money if does HUD have a definition of affordable housing? Well, I guess the answer is what I said before, which is affordable housing is an adjectival term. So it's not, there's no definition for it. People will sometimes say, well, by affordable housing in this context, what we mean is X or Y. So we mean people making this percentage of area median income. That's usually the metric we're using around here. Another one is you could look at it either from like how much money you make, can you afford unit X. The other thing you could do is do a area-wide survey, which is the array you referred to earlier, which is to say, if you are spending more than X percentage of your income on housing, then that's an indicator of a problem. Now that metric's not perfect because let's say you make $1 million a year, but you really like living in huge mansions and you spend $900,000 of your income on housing,
Right.
well, then you look like you're housing distressed. What you really are is somebody's living in a mansion. So,
Yeah.
I mean, these metrics are all, they all have their limits.
Another question coming from a documenter. Does the crime prevention through environmental design, or CPTED, program work?
I have no idea. I've never heard of that program before. I am sorry.
That's okay, I've never heard of it either. We'll move on to the next one. This one also comes from a documenter. Why use AMI when discussing affordable housing? Doesn't it make more sense to use the mode?
Well, the answer is because we're trying to say these units are going to be at this price because we think that people making X can afford it. So we're not trying to say this is affordable for the mode in the community. We're trying to say, and partly because we're trying to build things which will specifically be affordable by people who are making less than. We're not saying, because the mode might be, $100,000 a year, in which case, I mean, we know there are lots of people who can afford housing in Grand Rapids because they're buying houses. So they are able to afford housing. There are lots of people who are out renting existing rental units. They can afford rent in Grand Rapids, right? We have 200,000 people currently living in the city. Virtually all of those 200,000 people can afford the housing they're living in. I mean, like more than 90% of them for sure, maybe 99% of them, right? So we know that for them, the housing they have is affordable. Who are we more concerned about? Not that, millionaire who wants to massively overconsume and bought himself, the public library to live in and decides and figures out he made a horrible mistake. We're worried about the people who are making modest incomes and whether or not they can afford to live in the city. And so for that conversation, you start talking about area median income as a metric because it's not unreasonable to think that if somebody is able to work, I mean, if they don't have a disability, if they don't have some barrier to entering the workforce, it's reasonable to think, go around and see how much, Starbucks is paying their baristas right now. Like, those numbers aren't that hard to find. And if you've got a $15 an hour job, for example, and you're doing it 2,000 hours a year, you're making $30,000 a year. Well, as I pointed out earlier, that puts you at about 50% of AMI. Well, so then how does that person who's making 50% of AMI afford a house? You have to have units in your community that someone working at Starbucks can afford, or they're going to have to go either be homeless or they can't live in your community. They're going to have to live in a community outside of your community and be able to come in, maybe go to Wyoming, maybe go to a trailer park in Lowell or wherever. Like, they can't live in your community. And the test of whether you've got an inclusive, healthy, vibrant community, as far as I'm concerned, is can everybody live in your city? Not can everybody live in the same kind of housing, not can everybody afford the nicest houses in town. And one of the ways our conversation sometimes gets stuck, of course, is when you say, like, let's say we were having an affordability for cars question, and someone said, I can't afford a car. I can't possibly pay $50,000. You and I would immediately say, well, yeah, but like, have you been on eBay? Like, you can get a used car. They are much cheaper than new cars for a reason. They're not this year's cool model. They don't do 0 to 60 in whatever seconds, but they can get you to work, right? And you can go on Carvana and buy a used car. So similarly, I live in a used house. The cost of my house is way lower than the cost of building it from scratch right now. And so we all live in used houses, right? I mean, the day you move in, it starts being a used house. So the people who are less far up the income curve in town almost certainly are going to be living in things that are older, generally, just like I do, as a means of saving money. So when we're looking at affordable housing, you got to look at your housing stock, just not the thing you built yesterday, but also what's out in the community available for rent or purchase. And that's all used, just like used cars.
Yeah. Speaking of like houses that need to be remodeled, or not remodeled, but repaired, especially for houses that are for renters, these older houses, doesn't that cost usually get eaten up by the renter as well? Like living in an older house?
I think the answer is partly, but not completely. So in my house, for example, I need to paint the back window. Well, okay, so that's a cost, and if I had a brand new house with a brand new painted back window, that implied cost wouldn't be there, sure. On the other hand, I have 2-prong, not 3-prong outlets all over my house, and I just put up with it. So that makes my house cheaper. I'm putting up with something that no one would build right now because it saves me money. All right. So similarly, like with an old car, the reason people buy used cars is because they know they're more likely needed repair, but they also know they're a lot cheaper. And so even if you do have to, if you have to repair the radiator once next year, you still save $40,000 by buying a $10,000 car instead of a $50,000 car. You got a lot of room for repairs there, right? I mean, the average car in America now costs $50,000, and it's not that hard to find a used $10,000 pretty reliable car that's got a lot of life left in it. So same with houses. My house has got a lot of life left in it, I hope.
Great. Well, it's time now for us to take another break. When we return, we will be taking more questions from the public. Welcome back to City Connection. We're joined by Mayor David LeGrand taking questions from the public. Our first question comes from a documenter. How does the land bank work?
So I guess there's maybe two answers to that. One is, how does a traditional land bank work? And then, what exciting things do I hope a land bank can do?
Okay.
And so for everyone's background information, there was legislation that said that counties could have land banks, but not cities. And I wrote legislation when I was in Lansing to allow cities where the county didn't have a land bank to make their own land banks. And I didn't get it through when I was in the legislature, but it got passed afterwards. And so now, because of that, Grand Rapids could and did start its own land bank. So we have one. This is cool. It's in its first year. So what a land bank traditionally has done is, let's say David LeGrand stops paying his taxes and doesn't pay his taxes. And let's say he's living in a property that is really run down and he thinks it's not worth paying the taxes and he can't sell it because it's so run down. Eventually what happens is there's a foreclosure and the government comes and takes it for back taxes. It usually happens to places that are pretty run down, nobody wants to buy them, and so then the government is left with this thing, this foreclosed on property, and then the question is, how do we get that back out into the public. Is there someone else who can fix that place up and live in it or whatever? So it can be a piece of what we do about housing. So traditionally, that's been a lot of what land banks do, is they take properties that have sort of been received by the government and try to get them back out into public hands. And right now the city's got, it's around 100 properties and in the land bank, and they basically break down into 3 groups, and we just had a presentation about this at the land bank. I'm on the board, and there's 3 categories. There's things that we think are buildable, or we looked at empty lots, and we looked at, there's things that are buildable, things that might be buildable if you got a variance, like a setback, like, oh, you can't build on that lot because there's not enough, if you build a building on it, there wouldn't be enough grass. Well, if you had variance and said you don't have to have grass on the lot, then you might have room to build something. And then there's ones where it's just really hard to build because, you know, it's the side of a hill or something, and the hill's not stable and it doesn't look like you could build there. So we're looking at like what could be get into the hands of particularly like first-time emerging developers, people who want to get in the construction business, want to do rehab, but don't have any experience. Those are exciting people to get involved in those kinds of projects because they haven't been at the table traditionally, and they're not big, sophisticated folks. And so these are little projects. Go ahead.
Are they cheaper to purchase than like a not foreclosed on property?
Well, yeah, the hope is that they are. Now, there's a little bit of vetting that goes on. So the city wants to make sure that, like, you know what you're doing, that you're going to have some, and we can put qualifiers on it. So we can say, like, you can't build a hockey rink, right? Like, you have to build a house, or we want you to build a duplex, not a quad or whatever. Or, you know, we could do virtually infinite things because the city owns it, and we're looking for prospective good new owners, right? So it gives us a lot of flexibility. Now that's all cool. The other thing that the land bank can do that I think is on the horizon. So downtown, there's an entity called Downtown Grand Rapids Inc., which has historically been very good at doing sort of patient acquiring of property and then saying, okay, now let's do an arena because we have this land, or let's do this, or let's do that, or whatever. There's no mechanism, there's no publicly controlled, like a land bank entity that does that citywide. So there's no, before the land bank, that could say, okay, if we take this property and this property and this property, we think we can make a really new, cool neighborhood business district with some housing involved or whatever. So a land bank sort of is a planning arm of what we do, is a really exciting possibility. The other thing is that because a land bank is owned by the people, because it's owned by the city, it gives it space maybe to do things without people thinking, oh, someone's going to make a huge profit off this. This is terrible. Like, it's easy to think developers are all bad because they're making money. Well, I mean, nobody says that about somebody who buys stocks, right? You're a terrible person because you went and bought a mutual fund. But developers can sometimes get sort of grumbly bad rap. If a public entity like a land bank is involved in developing something, you know the benefits naturally flow to the community as a whole. And to the extent that it was able to make money here, it could lose money over here. And so if it is able to do that, if the end goal of that entity is to get affordable housing opportunities generally in the city, then it can make things that don't quite pencil out over here work by underwriting them a little bit. If it makes money over here on some deal for, you know, a retirement community that wants a piece of land to put in a big new retirement community, right? Like, okay, if the land bank owned the land and made a profit on that, it could then subsidize some duplexes down in a neighborhood that was underinvested. And so it could sort of equalize out investment energy in the city, or at least work towards that goal. So there are lots of opportunities for a land bank, I think, to do good in the housing space. And so I'm excited by it.
One follow-up question on this. It's in its first year, the land bank. Where were these houses prior to, like, who owned them prior to this land bank?
Well, we've had a state land bank.
Okay,
and so if any place where there isn't a land bank at all, the state will step in and it will take that land bank function.
Okay.
Now the problem with that is, like, who's on the state land bank? I don't know. Like, and they don't have, for example, I had one of our, the board we put together for this land bank, great group of really talented people with real skin in the game. And you know, already at our first meeting, one of our board members was like, I can find somebody to build a house on that property. Like, and so they just know, like, they're people, some of them in the nonprofit space, but they've got connections in the community, right? And they're like, there's no way I can't find somebody who won't see an opportunity there. So the simple function of having a good board means you can find opportunities that you maybe wouldn't find if you had some statewide board that doesn't know that, you know, the corner of Burton and Eastern is a pretty cool neighborhood and maybe people want to live there.
Yeah, local works.
Yep.
Moving on to another question. We had multiple questions related to federal immigration enforcement. When it comes to this topic, who do you seek counsel from, and what is the city doing to address the concerns of the community?
The answer to that, I guess, is I'm seeking counsel from everybody. I don't think anybody's disqualified to be concerned about this topic. It is a very, very concerning issue. I'm constantly reading about it, thinking about it, looking. The other answer is it's a moving target. So when you say, what are we doing? You know, you can ask me tomorrow and there will be new things we're thinking about tomorrow. So one example I think people were concerned about, and there's sort of a national conversation about, there's this company called Flock, and they do captures of license plates. Well, that data could get and can get shared outside of your jurisdiction or not. So we are not sharing that sharing that information outside of our jurisdiction. So we're not telling people in Georgia about our license plates. Now, ironically, we're getting information from Georgia about license plates they see from people who are involved in investigations in Grand Rapids. But we're actually kind of being hoggish about our Flock data, and we're totally able to do that. Now, people are concerned because some communities aren't as careful as we are about Flock. Some people aren't as careful as they should be. Communities aren't as careful. And, you know, some communities actually think ICE is a good thing. I am not excited about, I just said, like, I think it's a national tragedy that we have decided to be such an unwelcoming country. And the optics of the things that we're doing. And of course, the fact that what's going on in Venezuela just sort of shocked me. I'm still reeling from that. Now, that doesn't directly affect the city of Grand Rapids, but it's part of the mix, right? Like I don't want to be a participatory citizen of a country that decides it can just randomly kidnap heads of state from other countries, and then just say we're controlling the country now. I mean, that's just a really strange thing. I mean, I'm trying to think of historical analogies, but like that's dangerous, weird territory. Similarly, I'm not. There are things I'm deeply unhappy about the tenor of making folks in our community really, really scared. And so I am doing everything I can to make sure that our community is stable and people feel as secure as we can make them feel without false senses of security. And that's a really important part, because we don't want to tell people they're safe when they're not. It's a moving landscape. So it's really, really hard. I think the most important thing we're really doing right now is being vigilant. We are, and it's hard to do. It's hard to really, really be paying attention and really, really looking at what's going on without wanting to do something. The natural human instinct is like, okay, I'm ready, now let's go. Well, if there's nothing to go do, you just got to stay vigilant, and that's a really hard, emotionally draining place to be.
Right. Yeah, it's hard not to drown in that feeling.
Yeah.
If I can squeeze in one really quick question
Sure.
about data centers before we wrap it up.
Sure.
This one comes from a viewer. With many people not wanting data centers, what are you doing to address that concern?
Simple answers, those are all going, as far as I can see, they're all the action on that is in rural communities. Like nobody is coming in, to my knowledge, and saying, hey, we want to build a big data center on 28th Street or, next to City Hall. So I don't think those things tend to want to go in more rural areas where they can get big chunks of land, which they just can't get in a city. So that's the simple answer. They're just not on the horizon in Grand Rapids. So it may be something that people out in Lowell have to worry about, or people in Saline or Cannon Township. But I am not aware. Now, if they come, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. It's a simple answer. If somebody wanted to build a data center in Grand Rapids, we'd address it. My central concern would be to make sure that it didn't increase the utility costs for people living in the city. And that comes down to how hard a bargain you drive with new people who want to come in and start using your utilities. And if that happened, we'd have to pay very careful attention and make sure that we did not get the short end of the stick. Not interested in having corporations beat our citizens on a competition for resources.
Good deal. Well, that is all the time that we have for today's show. Thank you to our guests for coming in and sharing your insights, and thank you to all of you at home for tuning in and sending in your questions. Don't forget, you can always watch rebroadcasts throughout January on cable GRTV's Channel 25 or the GRTV YouTube page. See you next month, Grand Rapids.